Let's get right into it. Number 10. Your brain literally moves. Here's something nobody tells you at astronaut orientation. The moment you leave Earth's gravitational pull, your brain, your actual physical brain, shifts upward inside your skull. Not metaphorically, not as a figure of speech. The gray wrinkled thing you use to overthink texts at 2 a.m. physically floats toward the top of your head like a sad balloon that forgot it was attached to something. On Earth, gravity keeps your body fluids playing nice and staying low. Your blood, your cerebrospinal fluid, everything has a general agreement to hang around your lower body like it's at some kind of relaxed house party. The moment you hit microgravity, that agreement gets torn up. Fluid rushes toward your head and chest, and your brain, a fleshy sponge sitting in a pool of that same fluid, gets pushed upward and slightly squished against the top of your skull. NASA researchers confirmed this by scanning astronauts' brains before and after missions. The results looked like someone had taken a normal brain scan and just nudged everything north. The brain actually shifts position. Some astronauts showed a narrowing of the space at the top of their brain called the central sulcus, and a few showed structural changes that, if you saw them on a regular MRI at your local hospital, would have a radiologist raising a very concerned eyebrow. The terrifying part? This isn't just astronauts complaining about headaches. This is measurable, consistent, anatomical change. Your brain's home, the exact cozy cavity it evolved to fit perfectly in, stops being a perfect fit the moment Earth lets go of you. Now here's the kicker. Some of these changes don't fully reverse when astronauts come back. The brain settles, but it doesn't always settle back to exactly where it was. It's like moving furniture around and realizing you can't quite get the couch back to where it made the room make sense. Basically, space doesn't just challenge your body. It evicts your brain from a house it's been living in since before you were born. Number 9. Phantom Earth Syndrome. Picture this. You've been in space for 6 months. You're floating around the ISS, sipping recycled water from a pouch, doing science, and feeling like the coolest person alive, which statistically you are. Then you come home. Your capsule splashes down, the hatch opens, and you try to stand up, and your body looks at you like you've just asked it to solve calculus in a language it's never heard. Astronauts returning from long-duration missions frequently report a bizarre neurological experience where their brain genuinely forgets that gravity is a thing that exists. It's not just weak legs. It's a full-on perceptual malfunction. Some describe dropping objects because their hand released without warning, as if their motor system was running an old file from 6 months ago. Others have described reaching for something on a table and completely miscalculating how to do it. A task your nervous system has been performing flawlessly since you were a toddler. This happens because in microgravity, your vestibular system, the inner ear machinery responsible for balance and orientation, has been reprogrammed. In space, there's no down. There's no gravitational reference to tell your brain which way the floor is, so your brain, being the dramatic adaptation machine that it is, just quietly rewrites its balance algorithms. It stops trusting the vestibular signal and starts relying more on visual cues to figure out orientation. Then you land. Gravity slaps you in the face. Your inner ear screams, "Down is real," and your brain goes, "I've updated my software and that feature is no longer supported." The result is that astronauts often have to physically relearn how to walk. Not because their muscles are too weak, although that's also true, but because their sense of balance has been completely restructured around a world that no longer exists the moment they're back. Scott Kelly famously described his first shower after returning from nearly a year in space as feeling like being pelted with tiny needles, because his skin had become so hypersensitive to touch that water droplets felt aggressive. Your brain optimizes for the environment you're in. The problem is, it optimizes a little too enthusiastically. Number 8. Space breaks your eyes from the inside. There's a fun little trend that NASA quietly started panicking about around 2016. A significant portion of astronauts returning from long missions were reporting blurry vision. Not the "I stared at a screen too long" kind of blurry. The "I went to space with perfect eyesight and came back needing glasses" kind of blurry. And the cause wasn't radiation, wasn't stress, wasn't staring at the infinite void of the cosmos for too long. It was pressure. Specifically, the pressure building inside their skulls from all that fluid that migrated north. Here's how it works. That cerebrospinal fluid we talked about earlier, the stuff that cushions your brain, also surrounds your optic nerve. When fluid rushes to your head in microgravity, it increases the pressure around that nerve. Sustained pressure on the optic nerve over weeks and months begins to physically reshape the eye. The back of the eyeball flattens. The optic nerve itself can bulge. The result is a condition NASA calls spaceflight-associated neuroocular syndrome, or SANS, which is a very polite acronym for space is quietly destroying your vision from the inside out. What makes this especially unsettling is how gradual and invisible it is. Astronauts on the ISS aren't screaming about their eyes. Most notice mild blurring, maybe some difficulty reading. A few have had to swap out their prescription lenses mid-mission because their vision measurably changed while they were orbiting the planet. Which is wild. Imagine texting your optometrist from 250 miles above Earth because space has physically altered the shape of your eyeball. For short missions, the changes are often reversible. For missions lasting 6 months or more, the kind of duration required to get to Mars, the damage can become permanent. This is currently one of the most serious unsolved medical problems standing between humanity and deep space travel. Not asteroid collisions. Not fuel. Not alien encounters. Vision problems caused by fluid pressure. Your eyes quietly going on strike because they miss gravity. The universe is humbling in ways nobody puts on the recruitment poster. Number 7. Your brain stops knowing where your body is. Close your eyes. Touch your nose. You did it, right? Maybe embarrassingly fast, like you were trying to impress someone. That effortless ability, knowing where your body parts are without looking at them, is called proprioception. It's this invisible sixth sense your nervous system runs in the background constantly, mapping your limbs in space, tracking every joint angle, keeping a running log of exactly where you are in 3 dimensions. It works so quietly and so well on Earth that most people don't even know it exists. In space, it falls apart. Proprioception relies heavily on sensory input from your muscles, joints, and skin, inputs that are heavily shaped by gravity. When you're standing, your muscles are resisting gravitational pull, and your joints are bearing load. All of that mechanical feedback gets fed back to your brain as positional data. Remove gravity, and that stream of data changes dramatically. Your joints aren't bearing the same loads. Your muscles aren't resisting the same forces. The whole sensory landscape your nervous system uses to answer the question, "Where am I?" goes quiet in ways it's never experienced before. The result is something astronauts describe as deeply strange. A floating limb can start to feel detached, not emotionally but perceptually. Some astronauts have reported waking up in the middle of the night unsure where their arms were in relation to their body, because without visual confirmation and without gravitational feedback, the brain's body map goes partially offline. One astronaut famously woke up in a panic after his arms floated away from his body during sleep, and for a brief, disorienting second, his brain interpreted them as something in the environment, not parts of himself. Your brain constructs your sense of self, including your physical self, using constant sensory feedback. Take away the right inputs and the boundary between you and not you gets blurry in ways that are far more existential than any philosophy class prepared you for. Proprioception is the body's way of saying, "I'm here." Space makes it whisper. Number 6. Isolation rewires your social brain. Humans are the most aggressively social species on the planet. We built entire civilizations basically because we can't stand being alone. So naturally, the logical next step was to send a handful of us to a metal tube 250 miles above the surface with no ability to leave, no fresh faces, and a communication delay that makes texting feel like Morse code. Great plan. Long-duration space missions are a masterclass in enforced social isolation, and what they reveal about the human brain is both fascinating and deeply uncomfortable. Studies on astronauts and simulated isolation missions, like the Mars 500 experiment, where volunteers lived in a sealed habitat for 520 days, show consistent and measurable psychological patterns. Mood destabilizes. Motivation dips. Sleep disorders emerge. But the neurological changes are the part nobody really talks about at the astronaut graduation ceremony. Research from 2022 analyzing brain scans of cosmonauts who spent an average of 6 months on the ISS found that the amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm system, actually shrank. Volume reduction in the amygdala was directly correlated with mission length. Your brain, faced with a socially and environmentally monotonous environment, began physically downscaling the region responsible for processing emotional and social signals. On the surface, that might sound like a coping mechanism. Fewer social stimuli coming in, less infrastructure needed to process them. But the amygdala doesn't just handle social fear, it handles emotional memory, threat detection, and complex interpersonal processing. Shrinking it has consequences that don't stay neatly contained to being okay with fewer coworkers. There's also evidence that white matter connectivity in areas responsible for social cognition changes after extended isolation. The brain, deprived of the rich social environments it evolved for, starts quietly reorganizing its social architecture. It adapts, but adaptation isn't the same as thriving. Your brain didn't evolve in a tin can orbiting a lonely planet. And when you put it there long enough, it starts renovating in ways nobody asked for. Number 5. Radiation quietly rewrites your DNA. Space is not empty. This is one of those facts that sounds poetic but is actually a direct threat to your continued existence. The vacuum between planets is absolutely saturated with radiation, cosmic rays, solar particle events, and high-energy particles that have been flying across the galaxy for billions of years like microscopic bullets that have nowhere to be and nothing to lose. On Earth, the planet's magnetic field and atmosphere absorb most of this. You walk outside and don't think about it once. In space, beyond that protective bubble, your body takes the full hit. And your brain is not exempt. NASA's research on astronauts exposed to deep space radiation, particularly studies using simulated galactic cosmic ray exposure in lab settings, has found something that should give every aspiring Mars colonist pause. High-energy radiation doesn't just damage cells in a general, chaotic way. It specifically targets neurons, causes inflammation in brain tissue. It disrupts the functioning of the hippocampus, the region responsible for memory formation and spatial navigation, in ways that look uncomfortably similar to early-stage neurodegeneration. In animal studies, subjects exposed to deep space-level radiation showed measurable cognitive decline. Memory tasks that were previously easy became difficult. Anxiety behaviors increased. The brain's ability to suppress irrelevant information, something called cognitive flexibility, degraded. These aren't subtle blips. These are the kinds of findings that get highlighted, circled, and stared at in conference rooms by people who are supposed to be enthusiastic about Mars missions. For astronauts on the ISS, the Earth's magnetic field still provides partial protection. But a 6 to 9 month journey to Mars travels well outside that field, through open interplanetary space, with nothing between your neurons and the full fury of cosmic radiation except the walls of a spacecraft and optimism. The cruel irony is that the further humanity ventures into space in the name of exploration and discovery, the more the very organ responsible for curiosity takes the damage. Your brain wants to see what's out there. Space responds by slowly editing the brain itself. It's the universe's way of saying, look but don't touch. Except the looking is also kind of dangerous. Number 4. Your sense of time completely breaks down. On Earth, your body runs on a 24-hour biological clock called the circadian rhythm. It's one of the most ancient and deeply embedded systems in your entire biology, older than complex brains, older than most multicellular life. It governs sleep, hunger, hormone release, body temperature, immune function, and about 1,000 other processes you never think about but desperately rely on. The whole system is synchronized by one thing above everything else: sunlight. On the International Space Station, the sun rises and sets every 45 minutes. Let that sink in. Every single 90-minute orbit, astronauts experience a complete day-night cycle. 16 sunrises, 16 sunsets, every 24 hours. Your circadian rhythm, which evolved over billions of years to respond to one sunrise per day, suddenly has to deal with 16 and simply gives up trying to keep count. The result is that astronauts' internal clocks desynchronize from the external environment almost immediately. Sleep becomes fragmented. Melatonin levels, the hormone your brain releases to signal that it's nighttime and sleep should happen, stop following a predictable pattern. A significant number of astronauts report needing sleeping pills to fall asleep at all, which is a sentence that should probably be in larger font somewhere in the astronaut recruitment materials. But it goes deeper than just bad sleep. Circadian disruption affects cognitive performance in ways that are consistent and measurable. Reaction time slows, working memory degrades, decision-making under pressure becomes less reliable. These are not ideal side effects for people whose job description includes operating complex machinery and making critical decisions while hurtling through space at 17,500 miles per hour. The brain's timekeeping system doesn't just affect when you feel sleepy. It regulates the rhythmic release of nearly every major hormone in your body. When that rhythm is scrambled, your entire hormonal environment shifts. Cortisol patterns change. Immune function fluctuates. Even the timing of cellular repair processes, the quiet maintenance work your body does while you sleep, gets thrown off schedule. Your brain has been telling time since before your ancestors had eyes to see the sun. 16 sunrises a day doesn't just confuse it. It sends it a problem it genuinely cannot solve. Number 3. Spaceflight triggers an identity crisis for real. There is a psychological phenomenon that has been documented in astronauts since the Apollo era, discussed seriously in psychiatric and aerospace medicine literature, and somehow still sounds like something you'd read on a philosophy blog at 1 a.m. It's called the overview effect. And while it might sound like something a wellness brand would put on a tote bag, the neurological and psychological reality behind it is anything but soft. The overview effect is what happens when a human being sees the Earth from space for the first time. Not a photo of the Earth. Not a high-resolution image from a telescope. The actual Earth, hanging in the black, borderless, smaller than your thumbnail at the right distance, with no lines between countries, no divisions between anything, just a single quiet object that contains every person you have ever known and every event that has ever occurred in human history. Astronauts describe a sudden, overwhelming, and involuntary shift in perception. The pettiness of geopolitical conflict becomes viscerally obvious. The fragility of the planet becomes physically felt rather than intellectually understood. A sense of profound interconnectedness, the kind that typically takes years of meditation or a very specific type of forest hike to approximate, arrives instantly and without warning. Many astronauts describe it as the most intense psychological experience of their lives, including people who have survived combat, near-death experiences, or parenthood. Neurologically, what appears to be happening is a large-scale disruption of what researchers call the default mode network, the brain system responsible for your sense of self, your autobiographical narrative, and the mental model you carry of your place in the world. When the visual reality in front of you fundamentally contradicts the mental framework you've built over decades, the brain doesn't quietly update a file. It undergoes something closer to a system-wide recalibration. Edgar Mitchell, Apollo 14 astronaut and the sixth person to walk on the moon, described the experience as an instant global consciousness. Ron Garan called it a tragic contradiction between the beauty visible from space and the suffering happening on the surface below. These aren't poetic exaggerations. These are people describing a neurological event that reorganized how they understood themselves and the world. You can spend a lifetime building an identity around borders, belonging, and the everyday stakes of human life. Apparently, it takes about 90 seconds of looking at Earth from orbit to have that entire architecture quietly dismantled. Your brain constructs reality. Space shows it a version of reality it was never designed to process. Number 2. Your brain grows new connections, but loses others. Here's the part of the story where space travel gets genuinely complicated, because not everything it does to your brain is a horror story. Some of it is closer to a very intense, deeply uncomfortable growth experience, the neurological equivalent of whatever it is people mean when they say that difficult things made them stronger. Research on astronauts' brains using high-resolution MRI scanning has found that long-duration spaceflight actually increases gray matter volume in certain brain regions. Specifically, areas associated with movement coordination, spatial navigation, and sensor-motor integration tend to show growth. Your brain, forced to completely relearn how to move, balance, and operate in a three-dimensional environment without gravitational reference points, rises to the challenge by building more neural infrastructure in the regions responsible for those tasks. Think of it like going to the gym, except instead of choosing to go, You were launched into orbit at tremendous speed and gravity simply stopped being available as an option. The training happens whether you want it to or not. The catch, and there is always a catch, is that this growth appears to come at a cost. The same studies show reductions in gray matter in other regions, particularly those associated with the processing of lower body sensory information. The brain, operating with a fixed metabolic budget, appears to be redistributing resources. It invests in the functions that matter most in the new environment and quietly defunds the ones that seem temporarily unnecessary. On one level, this is a breathtaking demonstration of neuroplasticity, the brain's extraordinary ability to reorganize itself in response to new demands. On another level, it's a reminder that the brain isn't a boundless resource. Every adaptation has a trade-off. Every new connection is potentially funded by a reduction somewhere else. When astronauts return to Earth, some of these changes reverse. Others persist for months. Some, in longer missions, may be permanent. The brain that comes back from space is measurably, structurally different from the one that left. Not necessarily worse, but different in ways that are only beginning to be fully mapped and understood. You go to space as one version of yourself, neurologically speaking. You come back as a slightly revised edition. Same person, different wiring. Number 1. Space literally alters your gene expression. The most famous experiment in the history of space medicine didn't involve a telescope, a rocket engine, or a zero-gravity toilet. It involved two identical twins, one of whom spent a year on the International Space Station while the other stayed on Earth and served as the world's most convenient control group. Scott Kelly went to space. His brother Mark stayed home. And when Scott came back, NASA compared them in extraordinary detail. What they found reshaped the conversation about what space travel actually does to the human body at its most fundamental level. Scott's gene expression had changed. Not his DNA sequence. His genes didn't mutate in a science fiction sense. But the way his genes were being read, activated, and expressed had shifted in hundreds of measurable ways. The study identified changes in over 200 genes related to immune function, bone formation, oxygen dynamics, and, critically, cognitive function and brain maintenance. Some of these changes began reversing after Scott returned to Earth. About 8% of them had not returned to baseline even 6 months later. For the brain specifically, the implications are significant. Gene expression governs the production of proteins involved in everything from neurotransmitter regulation to cellular repair to inflammation management in brain tissue. When spaceflight alters which genes are being actively expressed, it's not just a cosmetic change to your biology. It's a change in the operating instructions your neurons are running on. This is where space medicine stops being just about headaches and bad sleep and starts touching something much deeper. The environment of space, its radiation, its microgravity, its isolation, its sensory strangeness, reaches all the way down to the molecular level and begins rewriting which parts of your genetic blueprint are active at any given moment. Your brain isn't just adapting behaviorally or structurally. It's adapting genetically in real time in ways that science is only beginning to understand. Humanity has spent thousands of years imagining what space would do to the adventurous, the brave, the brilliant people we send beyond this planet. Turns out space doesn't care about bravery. It reaches into your cells, finds the instruction manual for your brain, and starts making edits without asking permission. We are not built for space, and space, for its part, seems perfectly aware of that. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.